and examine some of those gendered pathways to health for both men and women, for a wide variety of different health outcomes, for women and men around the world and at different life stages. So, for example, we have a case study where we looked at care seeking of ill children in Ethiopia and found some evidence in certain pockets, in certain communities, of preferential care seeking for boys over girls. In Brazil, we have a study on adolescence where we looked at the long-term influence of parents' opinion on their children's health, specifically for girls who when they were 15, were dissatisfied with their bodies, and then 3 years later, using longitudinal data, were found to have worse mental health outcomes, so 18, but only among those girls who, when they were 11, thought that their parents thought they were fat, even though they were normal BMI, or normal weight. And then a third example of a case study is in our data from Nigeria on young adult women who, if they worked outside of the home, in communities where that was not normative for women to work outside of the home, she was more likely to experience intimate partner violence compared to women who did not, and only in those communities where it wasn't the norm. So these are 3 quick high-level views of 6 of our case studies. Ben and I are going to cover 2 more in a little more detail, and you'll have to read the paper to learn about the rest.
So the first case study that we want to tell you a little bit more about relates to HIV status of adolescent women in Zambia. So what we did is we used data from the Demographic Health Survey, the VHS, and we look at 2 things in particular. So the first thing we looked at is what people thought about premarital sex. And as you can tell, many people, 90% of both men and women, thought that premarital sex was not acceptable. It wasn't appropriate. Then we look at another thing. We look at what people actually did. And we found that actually, many people did engage in premarital sex in spite of the norm against it. So we call this the taboo gap. So the taboo gap is, and that's our hypothesis, that if you are doing something, if you're engaging in premarital sex in a place where you're not supposed to, well then you probably won't access health services, you won't talk about it, you won't ask advice. And we wanted to see if with the enlarging of this gap, HIV status of adolescents went up. And that's exactly what we found. So we found that the larger the gap, the greater the risk, particularly of adolescent women, to be HIV positive. We found a similar effect for adolescent men, but the data were not statistically significant. So this has clear implications for intervention. If you want to reduce HIV status in similar places, then you need to address the taboo gap, ensuring that peers, health services, and parents and children can have healthy and informative conversations about sex and what can be done to protect from the spread of HIV.
Thanks, Ben. And in this case study, it's from the US. It's about adolescent students in middle and high schools in the 90s, in the early 90s in the US, where the students were asked about their behaviors and their beliefs. For example, did you take a virginity pledge? Do you think you're going to be going to college? And we looked at their responses and looked at what most boys and most girls, how they behaved, and then where they fell on a continuum of behaviors. And we labeled this continuum on the left-hand side, or your left-hand side, more feminine, and on the right-hand side, more masculine. And you see that there's a distribution for girls and boys. Most, not surprisingly, girls are on the more feminine side and most boys on the more masculine, but there's girls and boys at each extreme of both distributions. And we were interested in whether how far students were from that median, where most of their peers were, whether being at the extremes had an effect on their health. And sure enough, we did find that it did among multiple health outcomes. I'm just showing a few here. If you've seen the paper, it's quite a number of them. But for example, so hyperfeminine girls, so girls that are on the far left extreme, and boys who are feminine, tended to engage in risky weight loss behaviors like taking pills, diet pills, or laxatives. And the other part of it would be that more masculine boys, or masculine girls, or hyper-masculine boys, we saw engaged in more delinquent behavior as well as weight gain behaviors like muscle building. And then girls, it turns out, on either side of the extreme, reported more depressive symptoms. So this is important for reflecting that young adolescents who are not conforming to expectations of their peers are at higher risk for negative consequences. And of course, the importance of addressing that in programming. So our 6 case studies, we were quite successful at showing some important facts about the effects of gender norms in health. But we were also, because we're using existing data that was not designed for this purpose, we encountered many challenges, not the least of which was the fact that we really only had sex disaggregated data. We only knew if they were male or female. We didn't have the continuum of gender that would be much more important to have. Additionally, we found in a lot of global surveys, we uncovered some of the phrasing was very stereotypical. It really revealed our stereotypes about men and women in our research. So for example, people might be asked in a survey, do children suffer when women work? But that question of do children suffer if men work is not asked. So definitely it reveals our internal biases. And finally, probably, there are many more limitations in the paper, but one of the main limitations was missing data. Entire demographic groups that might be missing information, or questions only asked of men, for example, around risky sexual practices, or questions only asked of women, for example, on child health and care.
And as many of you know, having data sets and databases and surveys that are gender aware or even gender intentional, so that data are collected with the purpose of understanding how gender equality is changing, how patterns in gender equality are changing over time, can have a twofold, and potentially many more, but at least 2 benefits. First one is that research will become more wider and more capable of achieving and understanding trends in gender equality globally through time. And the second benefit is that we will be in a position of designing better policies and interventions to achieve greater gender equality through time. And paper 3 is exactly about the effectiveness of gender transformative policies and interventions. And Jessica and Church are going to tell us something about it. Thank you.